Thank you, Stephen, for joining us, and thank you so much to everyone who's just joined us for our webinar today. Now, those of you who've been to our webinars before, you'll know what this series is about, but for those of you who haven't, this is a series of webinars that JJ have brought together, which is about how COVID-19 is disrupting marketing and sales. And it's very much there to help us all learn from how the world of business, the world of work, is changing at this time of huge and historic disruption, and the role that different parts of marketing and sales are playing in that as well. So in this webinar, we're going to be focusing on customer experience. And before we got started today, I was talking to Hannah, who's one of our speakers, about why we think this is a very practical topic. We're all customers, as Hannah said, we've all experienced bad or good customer experience at some point. And it's probably become quite notable for all of us. And we probably notice it even more given that so many of us are having to do many more things online during this time. So I'm sure there's plenty of examples that our delegates will be sharing as well as our speakers. So we're looking forward to that. Later in the webinar, we will be hearing from our speakers. We've got two fantastic speakers who I'm going to introduce you to later, and we'll be hearing from them about their experience of the trends that they've seen since the pandemic began, some of the pitfalls, and also how organisations can plan for what they need to do next about customer experience, which I think is a really interesting challenge given the fact that many organisations will have some quite limited resources at the moment, understandably. In terms of webinar protocol, one thing that I say every week is, if you can, it would be brilliant if you can have your camera on. It helps other people to see you and get to know you. So it's a bit more like being in a room with others. If when others are speaking, you can put yourself on mute, that would be very much appreciated, just because it's easier then for everyone to hear each other. So those are just two things I would suggest. Final thing, we encourage people to really discuss some of the questions that are being raised at this webinar, and also to share their thoughts. If you would like to speak, please do feel that you can dive into the conversation. There's a chat box on the right hand side, which you can see there, and we would encourage you to put your thoughts and ideas in there as the webinar goes along. Equally, we're also really happy for you to put your hands up and to join the conversation that way. So you can either physically put your hand up and we will come to you, or you can use one of the reactions in the bottom taskbar on the screen itself. So we encourage you to very much see these events as a conversation rather than all of us talking at you. So today, as I said, we will be talking about customer experience. I'm really looking forward to doing that. We like to start these webinars by understanding a bit about where everyone is at with the topic of the day. So what we'd like you to do is to put the big burning question that you might have about customer experience into the chat box. So it might be how you can improve customer experience on a limited budget. It might be about how you can understand your customers a bit more so you can design the customer experience around them. It might be about how you can increase your digital footprint and get more customers into your pipeline, as it were, to have the experiences that you've put together for them and ultimately to drive conversion. But whatever it is, what I would encourage you to do now is to put those big burning questions into the chat box, and then we will have a short discussion about those, and then we will hear from our speakers. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to put those questions into the chat box. So off you go. Great question here from Richard. Can we make online learning experiences even better than physical learning experiences? Excellent question.
Yes.
Thank you, Hannah. We'll look forward to hearing more about that later. any other burning questions, please do put them in the chat box now. I guess one of the big questions that I'm really interested to explore today is, given that there's such a premium on really high quality customer experience, how you can deliver that when a lot of organisations don't have a great deal of money at the moment is going to be really, really key. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. Ooh, and a great question from Peter here. Peter, can you talk us through this?
Yes, I can. Hello to everybody.
Hello, Peter.
With most of our sales in the past, it's always been built by a relationship, which has been very much a face-to-face thing, where we kind of demonstrate how we deliver our service and things like that, and that seems to work very well. Now we are obviously very remote from them, and any service we provide is naturally remote. We used to work on their client sites, but of course we have to work remotely now. So it's really a case of how do we replicate that very personal face-to-face contact in this environment?
It's a great question, and I have some insight that might help with that.
Excellent. Great. Well, we will find out more about that later. And Peter, just on that point, so that we can make sure that you're answering your question in the best way possible, what's the key thing you want to replicate there? Is it about rapport with the customer, or is it about the relationship as well that you have with the customer overall? What would you like to replicate if I could wave a magic wand?
Yes, it is that, exactly as you've said, really. It's that rapport and that rapport of personal relationship. And I think one thing that you get more and more with a face-to-face contact is that body language and things that go on, which I haven't got my video switched on. I'll put that on. Actually, I'll start that now. But you don't tend to get that. You don't tend to get that in this environment. You're trying to struggle to see those nuances of body language and things like that. So that's very difficult. So I think that rapport and trust and the genuineness of that sort of face-to-face contact, I think, is difficult to replicate in this environment.
Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge, isn't it? And definitely one I'm keen to pick up as part of the panel discussion, because I think it's relevant to anyone who's trying to build relationships with people online, whether that's customers and I think colleagues as well. Great, thank you for raising that issue, Peter. And then Jamie, you've raised a really good question. Can you tell us a bit more, again, there, what success would look like for you if we could magically fix this problem?
The way I saw it in my head really was, how can we make it so that, so it's a housing association that I work for, so how could we make it so that our tenants are kind of missing the coming in to see us physically a little bit less than they might have been at the start of this, and kind of making it almost as, I mean, for a lot of our tenants, especially the older ones, it's a very hard task to do, but just at least alleviating it somewhat so that it's more inviting to kind of use our online interaction points rather than coming to see us physically.
That's a great point, isn't it? So how you can make those digital touch points interactive and really intuitive for people to come and talk to you on. Excellent, great. Well, we'll look forward to exploring all of those issues more. Now seems like a very appropriate time to dive into our panel discussion. And we've heard a little bit from our speakers already, but I'm delighted to introduce them more formally. So we've got two wonderful speakers with us here today, Hannah and Stephen. And to say a little bit about them both, thank you for the wave, Hannah, very good. Thank you for the wave, Stephen. Hannah Kowszun is a marketing and fundraising specialist for the charity sector, and she's passionate about using her skills for social benefit. She's currently head of fundraising at the think tank NPC, also known as New Philanthropy Capital, and she's previously had roles at Kew Gardens, the Science Council and Macmillan Macmillan Cancer Support, where she managed the world's biggest coffee morning. She got a professional diploma in marketing a few years ago and is currently studying for a master's in organisational psychology at Birkbeck. And I can imagine that qualification is going to be even more valuable now than it would have been before. Excellent. So welcome, Hannah, and welcome also to our second speaker, Stephen. So Stephen Solademi is Managing Director at SOS Creativity. They're a marketing and web development agency based in Bolton, Greater Manchester, and they're focused on helping other businesses grow through their online presence. They were nominated for the Online Business of the Year in 2017 and have worked with multiple clients across 5 different continents and diverse sectors. And their ethos is very much about delivering outstanding services for clients. So I'm sure there's lots that Stephen can share about getting the right customer experience for customers in place. Welcome, Hannah, and welcome, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So thanks so much to both of you for joining us, especially at what I know is a really busy time for both of you. Hannah, perhaps we could start with you, and then we'll come to Stephen as well, both on the topic of the trends which you have noticed in how customer experience it has changed since lockdown began. So what have you noticed, Hannah?
Well, I think the single biggest thing I've noticed internally, but also other organisations doing, is a willingness to try new things that I don't know about you, but when you work somewhere that's a bit risk averse, or even not risk averse, you have to write a paper, you have to write a proposal, you have to get people involved, you have people engaged, and it can take months to innovate. And I think what's really exciting about this environment is innovation. It has been necessary. So it stops being an exercise in bureaucracy, and it starts being people from the top saying, what can we do? And so I feel like you can see creativity of people who are in roles like marketing because they're creative coming through. I think the other thing is that our customers themselves are being forced to be comfortable with digital in a way that many segments wouldn't have been before. So, I mean, the classic example is someone's parents or grandparents, depending on your age. The last 3 months, they're suggesting Zoom calls with me, let alone the other way around. And instead of staring at their hands, I'm now staring at their faces. And in a similar way, I think the fact that customers themselves are more comfortable with digital is an opportunity for us to be better at using it. So where previously we might have said, oh, maybe we shouldn't use too much email because or we shouldn't use an online call because it's not very people aren't comfortable with it. Actually, it's become a lot more common. So I think what has started as being reactive and necessary has now become a little bit more mainstream. And that's quite exciting for me. But I do think that as a business, we haven't necessarily formalized some of those processes internally. So I think a big opportunity is to start to plan it into our plan it in for the future. So the fact is, we are not going to go from everyone doing online meetings now to everyone meeting face to face again. It's just not going to happen. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is timing. We don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic. But the other reason is because people are finding benefits from this. I think that point about face to face, if you think about it, it's so much cheaper for your customers to meet someone online. It's so much cheaper. They don't have to get a train ticket. They don't have to put their trousers on, So there is if you can tap into the benefit for them that meeting online is, that they haven't spent money, they haven't spent resources meeting you, so they're actually in a better place to be asked to potentially do more. So I don't know if that's quite answered your question, but those are my initial thoughts.
No, that was great. Thank you, Hannah. And I think what you illustrated brilliantly with that final point was about how customers' expectations have shifted. So I'm sure we've all got friends where, as part of their job and the business development they do, they have had to travel a lot. But that is now very much being stopped at the moment, but also called into question in terms of why would you fly halfway around the world for a 30-minute meeting? It's going to be one of those business norms that I think is really not going to exist in the same way that it did previously. So yeah, great example. Thank you, Hannah. Great summary. And Stephen, tell us about the trends that you've noticed.
Yeah, so similar to what Hannah's mentioned, in the sense that a lot more people are open-minded to exploring avenues like Zoom, for example. So I've been in the digital sector and embracing technology. I've always been conducting meetings via platforms like this. So for example, one of our long-standing clients is a financial advisor firm based out of San Antonio, Texas. And they've been clients for over 3.5 years. I have never met them in person. And the relationship started online. It's continued online. They're happy with our service and we're delivering great service for them. And they're still a client till today. So what I'm noticing from a trend perspective is actually people are starting to think, okay, let's embrace Zoom. Let's see how we can incorporate this into the way we do business. And what I'm noticing as well is people are being more productive from a meeting standpoint. So if you think about it, in an 8-hour day, you might actually only be able to fit about 4 to 5 meetings in. If you factor travel time, especially for people that live in London, maybe not as much because of the extra traffic. But now, on average, my meetings per day are anywhere from 6 to 8, because you can jump off a meeting, give yourself about 15 minutes to be able to action the point of that meeting and straight on to the next one, rather than spending 45 minutes driving when you can't actually do anything. So in the last, say, 4, 6, 8 weeks, I've actually been able to engage with more clients through this sort of platform. So from a productivity level, I would say I'm seeing that as a trend that's increasing. From a open-minded point of view as well, a lot more people are being open-minded, because guess what? You have no other option. If you want to do business in this current climate, you just have to embrace the technology that's available. So those are the two main things that I'm seeing from a trend perspective.
Thank you, Stephen. That's really helpful, and I think that picks up on some of the themes that were talked about earlier around building relationships, and we'll come back to those points a bit more, I think, when we come on to the Q&A. So those both really interesting about how customer expectations are changing and how that can lead to some real benefits in terms of productivity and how people want to engage differently now. Question for both of you actually is about how can we design our customer experience so that it meets those changing customer needs, because it's something that's evolving quite rapidly at the moment, isn't it? Hannah, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think what I'd say here is that automation is your friend. I think there's huge opportunities, particularly with email marketing. And what I mean by email marketing isn't the customers you engage by email, it's all of your customers and the touch points that are given through email. So even though you might have a lot of face-to-face experiences, really kind of enhancing that relationship through email can be really good. I mean, when it comes to automation, I'll give you an example. So for example, for your email marketing, if you segment the types of content that you put into your emails into really distinct categories. So for example, how-tos or what's new, it depends on what you're doing, but if you really have very distinct categories, not too many, not too esoteric, you can then create an automation that groups your recipients according to whether they click on a particular type of category most often. So, and you need to be really clear about what you mean by most often. Is it 3 times in a row? Is it 5 times in a row? And you can then, by having these groups, you can then tailor emails to groups that gives them the content they really enjoy, whether they're aware of it or not. I think the point about insight is it's not what people tell us, it's what we notice. And that's really where the excitement of this job comes in. If you do a survey that says, hello, what was it? 20 years ago, if Apple had done a survey saying, would you like to have touchscreen technology for your phone? They'd probably have a huge amount of people reply and say, God, no, like my hands are dirty, I'd drop it, I'd break it, whatever. And instead they just put it out there and people learned it and they got excited by it. In a similar way, because we're doing things that are digital much more, we have an opportunity to test things and try things that aren't as expensive. And so think about what kind of automations, what other insights you can automate. But similarly, it doesn't have to be automated. If you have clear segmentation, you can update customers in other ways. So you can kind of, like, if you've had a chat with someone, you can go into their record and their database and you can mark them as someone that's really interested in this kind of thing or that kind of thing. And then that feeds into what you're telling people. And you can notice if you've got really huge groups of people that seem to be interested in this area of your business and really not many people interested in that area, at which point you're like, well, why are we spending so much energy on that area? And it's kind of I think that's what's really exciting. But yeah, that was my first thing I thought I'd put out there.
So that's really interesting, because it's about seeing the customer experience also as an ongoing learning experience for the organisation, isn't it? I loved your point about how insight isn't necessarily what people are telling you. It's what you notice about the behaviours and what the data is telling you about that. Excellent. Thank you for that, Hannah. Stephen, what are your thoughts on how organisations can improve the customer experience at a time of such change?
Absolutely. It's a great point Hannah mentioned there regarding the Apple. I think the best analogy to help boost that point is from Henry Ford of the Ford Motor Company. Henry said a long time ago that if we had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. However, he went ahead and obviously invented cars because he could see that was going to add way more value than just horses. So the best way companies can go around improving the customer experience for their customers is you actually need to take a step back. What I find in our industry is most companies, most businesses don't even know who the perfect customer is. They have an idea of what they think the perfect customer is, but they actually, in some cases, are very way off. So when we start any marketing activity, we look at three things. The first one is to understand the goal. What does success look like? Is it we want to increase engagement by 20%? We want new leads every single week, every month, whatever it is. We define the goal. Then the next step is the critical one, the most important. Who is the ideal customer? Who is the perfect customer? We do something which is called a buyer persona. This is where we go around in detail, look at the demographic, the psychographic, what are their interests, what did they like, what did they not like, what kind of content are they consuming, what type of platforms are they spending time on. And we look at all this information to then define the perfect customer. Regardless of any businesses, there's always an average of 3 to 5 different profiles that makes a great fit customer. So when a business really understands that, the third part of the equation is actually easy, which is putting the strategy in play, because everything that you do become contextual to the perfect customer. Meaning, if you know that this particular segment, they enjoy email communication, following on from what Hannah said, you're able to create email marketing campaign. But if you know that this section of our ideal customers, they require quick, instant sort of feedback, maybe social media is the best way to go for them. So by really delivering what each individual wants, you're able to increase that. You're able to increase a positive customer engagement. And some of the ways we've been able to do that internally is, so we create one YouTube video every single week that goes on YouTube, because people learn in so many different ways. So some of the people will watch that video. However, that same video, we convert it into podcast, because some people just like to listen to it while they're driving, or while they're working out, or just some audio in the background to learn something from. So the same video that we've created, we strip the audio out and put that onto podcast. And that same podcast you can find on Spotify, Google, iTunes, on all the different podcast channels there are, because like I keep saying, it's going back to the customer. Some people are able to use Spotify. Some people are so Apple-based, they only use iTunes, but we're removing as much friction as possible to add value to them. And when you do that, the customer experience is far more positive, which then helps you as a company achieve your goals.
That is, can I just jump in? Stephen, I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I completely agree. I think on the point of social media, I think being incredibly clear about whether your brand fits with social media channels is a really important exercise. So Stephen's point about the channel where someone might find content is that's basically, how do you get the message out there? Are you getting it through Spotify, Apple, etc.? If, however, someone says we should be on Snapchat, first of all, like, is your brand image based? If it's not really that image based, if you're not out there, if you don't have a product you can do imagery, it's not going to work. Same with Instagram. If you're not on Twitter yet, then starting on Twitter now can take a large amount of effort to really be there. So I think there's something about internally, as a marketeer, you need to be really confident when other people say, why aren't we doing this, or why aren't we doing that? Because you can say, we are doing this, we are doing that, like Stephen's saying, really exciting things that gets people excited, but you also don't want to get yourself spread too thin simply because someone's mate says, why aren't you on Facebook? So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, isn't it? Because I think that the question behind that point, as it were, is about what does making good decisions look like in digital marketing, and what data, what evidence are we going to use to really inform and guide those decisions. And I'm inclined to agree with you, Hannah, because I think we've all seen situations where organisations say, well, we feel we should be on this channel because everyone's saying we should be on this channel. But if it's not the right thing for your customers and you don't have the internal abilities to resource it, then it can go horribly wrong, can't it? And there can be some significant reputational management that needs to be done as a result of that.
Absolutely. What to summarize those 2 points, when I get asked like what social media platform do we go on, my answer to my audience and contacts and customers is, you don't need to be on every social media platform, but you need to be on every social media platform that your audience is on. That's the best way I'm able to answer that question. Then you think to yourself, okay, just because you're on A, B, C, D, E, F, G, my audience actually are not on them. My audience are only on B and C. Therefore, I just spend all my resources on B and C. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, very, very, very much so. Thank you. Absolutely. You're right. However big you are, even if you are in a fortunate position with resources and skills at the moment, you cannot be on all channels. You have to cherry pick, don't you? And I think that's really key to having a really good digital customer experience. Brilliant, thank you. So some great points there about what to aim for, and indeed some of the pitfalls as well. Question now, which I think is very relevant to lockdown gradually easing. We're starting to see everyone taking some tentative steps towards that over the last few weeks, and of course in the weeks and months ahead. As that begins to change, what do you both think is the best way to begin to integrate those on and offline customer experiences? Hannah, shall we start with you on that one?
Well, I mentioned the automation earlier. I think spending time working out your workflow is never wasted, and working out the touch points on any customer's journey and how they feed into each other is just spending a day just imagining, getting a little Lego character and imagining that they're engaging with you, and at what point are you engaging them, and at what point are they responding to you? And in this context, actually, I think GDPR can also be your friend, because what GDPR does is it forces you to consider what are you telling someone at the point at which they're giving you your data, and what are you then going to do with that data? So it helps you really focus. For example, if you're inviting people to a Zoom meeting, that's an opportunity when they fill it. If you register, you're given your details, that's an opportunity to make sure it's really clear that they've got an opportunity to opt into emails from you. Do it, make sure it's there. If they are people that, people are getting better at clearing their cookies on the website, but making sure that there's opportunities on the website to follow up. Like, so what? Every single time you send someone something, think about, so what? What am I going to do about this? And what's the next stage in their experience with you? So really, the planning is never wasted. What's worse is throwing yourself in there, starting to do stuff, and then a little bit down the line going, wait, what are we doing? What are we doing with these email addresses? What are we trying to achieve? So yeah, that's all. The background is always important.
Yes, and understanding that journey step by step is so important, isn't it, for building a successful customer experience and all those different routes and pathways that there are through that. Stephen, have you got any advice then for people on how they're going to best integrate those on and offline experiences at a time of such change?
Absolutely. And one thing you got to bear in mind is you have to be open-minded as a business, because while COVID-19 is slowly reducing in terms of businesses starting to open, and there are some offline activities going on as well as online activities, the most important thing is to remove the friction for the end users where it doesn't have a negative impact on you. For example, so I mentioned earlier that I've been doing a lot of online meetings, and on some days it's 6 to 8. Last week, I think it was Friday or Thursday, I actually drove out 30 minutes to a prospective client's premises for a face-to-face meeting, because we already had 2 meetings via phone call and online, but we're getting closer to the last stage of the transaction, and they wanted to see me in person. They wanted me to meet the business partners as well. So I was comfortable in the sense that as long as it's the distancing rules, so around the boardroom, and everyone was giving each other enough space to conduct the meeting, I was more than open to doing that. So in some instance, if you're not open-minded and comfortable with a scenario like that, from a business point of view, that could be a business transaction that I could potentially have lost. However, it's being open-minded and offering both channels of communication. Then you're removing that friction from the end user. And when you're able to do that, it's easier to convey your value proposition. It's easier for them to transact with you. So as things start sort of reducing slightly from the lockdown sense, if you will, it's just being open-minded. Know that not everyone is gonna want to continue everything online, and there are some people that will still want that offline experience. But if you can blend both approach in a way that doesn't impact you negatively, of course, because at the end of the day, while you're trying to please your customers, you can't please everybody. So you need to make sure it's not impacting you negatively. Then using technology to help boost that and put the necessary measures in place. That would be a great way to improve customer experience.
Absolutely. It feels that giving people different options based on their circumstances and preferences is even more important right now, isn't it? Given that there are so many different ways in which the pandemic is playing out for different people. Excellent. So lots of fantastic examples there. Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you, Stephen. Don't go anywhere, because we've got lots of interesting questions that have been posted earlier on the chat, and I'm sure we're going to hear some more as well. Perhaps we could start with Peter's question, which I think was about rapport and relationships. So before we get onto that, Peter, do you want to say a little bit more about that? You talked about how replicating the rapport and the relationship was really important, but having just heard that discussion, is there anything else that jumps out at you there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because with one of our clients, for example, they have multiple sites, and and following this discussion, it's made me think that I could invite them, rather than invite them that I attend their site to have a meeting with them and try to sell to them, that sort of thing. I could invite all of them to a single Zoom call and say, right, should we get together, have a discussion about how we can help in the future? And that brings it into a single place where they're normally on 3 or 4 different sites potentially, and I would travel to each of them at separate times. Now I could potentially just have one Zoom call and invite them all in at once. So it's, and I think, it still doesn't achieve the same face-to-face rapport, but I think we've just got to get used to that. And I think that's what comes across, is that we've got to find different ways of creating that trust.
Exactly. And I think what you've highlighted brilliantly there, Peter, is about how these platforms really democratize the potential to be a facilitator and a convener. So if you can bring people together in a situation like this and get everyone on the same page, they're going to be enormously grateful to you, I'm sure. So just staying on that point, because I love the issue that you've raised there about how you can build those relationships with people and get that rapport going, even if it's got to be done digitally, and develop those long-term relationships. I'm just wondering, Hannah and Stephen, do you have any thoughts on that? Hannah, do you want to kick off on that point?
Yeah, so one of the things, so NPC's fundraising, a lot of it is what's called major donor fundraising, which is basically that you're convincing incredibly rich people to give you a lot of money. And the perceived wisdom is that this can only be done face to face. Like that's what everyone believes. And to be honest, it's generally true previously. However, for the last 3 months, we haven't been able to meet face to face, and we almost certainly won't, because if we want them to give us money, what we don't want to do is bring them into London on COVID infested trains or planes and say, here we are. So one of the things we did was we created what we called a drop-in, which was every week. And previously, we'd have invited someone to an event maybe every 3 months, maybe even every 6 months. It would be a big event, and it would be fancy, and it would be expensive for us to run, and it would be ego boosting for them. And quite a few of our people have said, do you know what, I hate those things. I hate those things. It's all dressing up fancy and being given champagne. And actually this way we get to just hear what you're doing. And it kind of, Jamie, you were saying about people on the, with your housing estates, creating drop-in moments is a lot easier if for both of you, you're not having, you're kind of being able to do it online. So I think being more, basically showing that you're accessible is a really valuable thing. And being accessible means, like Stephen was saying, reducing the friction. What you're not saying is, hey, I'm accessible if you come to London. I'm accessible if you come to Birmingham. Instead, you're saying, I'm accessible because I'm right here. Here's my Zoom. You can, to be honest, you can have your Zoom personal thing open all the time. And just if someone wants to come in, you admit them. I mean, that's a bit extreme, but why not think of it that you could have a drop-in day, I think that availability, accessibility is really valuable. And repeating yourself a lot, saying thank you 3 times, inviting them, reminding them the night before, oh, we're meeting tomorrow. When they've done it, saying thank you. You actually got the opportunity to do a lot more talking to them, to do it. Whereas when you meet face to face, I think everyone assumes that you both had a really good experience. You did it face to face and you shook hands. Well, actually, it wasn't necessarily a good experience for them. So you have to work harder at creating that rapport. So do it. So work harder. That's what I would say.
So some great tips to take away there. So I loved your point, Hannah, about creating those opportunities for serendipitous connection. And thinking about it, I have seen quite a few organisations doing things like office hours and surgeries online, even an hour or 2 a week for people to drop in and to start to build those connections with previous or new customers, which I think is a great idea. So thank you. I think that's great advice. And Stephen, do you have any thoughts on how you develop that rapport and build those relationships with people online?
Absolutely. To add to what Hannah said, one of the simple way to actually build rapport is by engaging with the other person online. So put it this way, before two complete strangers become best friends, there's numerous interactions. There's going to be phone calls, there's going to be text messages, there's going to be social media interaction, there's going to be going out in person, grabbing a coffee, grabbing a drink. There's 1,000,001 different type of interaction. It's the exact same thing in the business sense. It's the exact same thing in the online world. One of the simplest way to build is by simply engaging with the other person's social media. For example, if you're trying to build a relationship with, say, let's take, I can see Steve's name pop up. So if I was trying to build a relationship with Steve because he had something valuable for me and I had something valuable for him, if I only have to wait till every time I can see him in a face-to-face, there's no chance of that happening because he's a very busy person. I'm probably a very busy person, and it's just not going to happen. However, if every 5-10 minutes that I'm on LinkedIn and I see his name pops up and I liked his post, and then maybe I came across a piece of content that I thought, oh, valuable for him, and I forwarded to him on WhatsApp, and then there was more important event going on and I sent it to him on email, in those little 30 seconds activities over time, our relationship is going to be so strong, and we probably haven't even met face-to-face once. So using things like that is a way to build rapport, which then goes back to the overall sort of conversation that Hannah started with email marketing. By using email marketing, by using, say, for example, YouTube content, podcast, then social media and emails, then the face-to-face, then Zoom calls, those individual activities connected together is what's going to help form a strong bond from a rapport building point of view. And all of those activities does not have to take a lot of time. The face-to-face meeting, that takes a lot of time. Travel time, then the actual meeting time that most people for some reason tend to have as 1 hour, which some of those could be done in half the time. Then the traveling back, and you've already lost 3 hours. In doing 15 minutes activity, you could build a much stronger bond because you're being contextual to the person and actually offering value. So that would be my advice on that. And that's some of the things that I do.
That's great advice, because it's about taking that step-by-step approach, isn't it? And listening to people and really earning their trust by not broadcasting, but sharing things with them which you know they'll be interested in based on what you observed about their behaviour. Fantastic. So great advice from both of you there. Thank you. We've still got a few more questions. Sorry, say that again.
Sorry, it's Steve Radford. Can I just jump in? I've just got one point to make.
Yes, go for it, Steve.
I think what Hannah and Steve said is spot on. I think the other thing to think about is we often use in this word, I almost said the new normal then, which I'd get smacked for. But we use the word digital, and I'd like to think of the word remote rather than digital, because sometimes and it's all about, as Stephen said, it's the interaction. And whilst digital tools can be really great, there are lots of other ways to create that remote rapport and build that interaction. For example, we work a bit with Britvic. How do you get a physical, when you're face to face with somebody and you're sampling, how do you replicate that online? Well, they did a lot of work to try and do that. And actually the result was really, well, no, just send them the stuff and know when it arrives and then engage them on that day. And so you can have you can do it remotely rather than purely digitally.
I completely agree. I actually wrote notes before this session saying, do not underestimate the value of postal exchange. And especially now, because we still have a post service and we need to use them. And getting something practical. I mean, you must know this from just ordering a parcel online. You're like, oh, yay, it's arrived. Well, wouldn't you want to create that? Oh, yay, it's arrived for your customers. So, and it's not expensive, especially if done en masse. I've been doing thank you cards for people, just little cards, say thank you so much for sticking with us, you know, and you can have them pre-printed. I know it's not as personal, but it's still nice. And if any of you are customers for things like, I recently started a packed coffee because I love my coffee and it's absolutely delicious. And they do a brilliant welcome journey. And I bought some fabric recently and she wrote a little smiley face on it. Those little moments, that's, Peter, your question about personality. one of the ways that you portray personality is you give your team the autonomy to have a personality. I mean, no one in my organisation has told me to take Darth Vader off the wall. Bearing in mind, I had a call the other day with David Sainsbury's daughter, who is a billionaire. No one said you need to be professional. I can also be personal. And I think the teams, what autonomy we give teams, what autonomy we give ourselves is really important. And so you can kind of create boundaries. You know, this was probably a little bit too far, but within this boundary, have fun with it.
Absolutely. And that point about rapport is that I suppose one of the advantages at the moment is you can see into people's homes, can't you? And that in itself is a bit of a leveler and a way to begin to build a bit more of a relationship. Great advice, both of you. Thank you. There's a few more questions to come back to one we had earlier. Richard, you had a brilliant question about how you can make online learning experiences even better than physical learning experiences. Is there anything you want me to add to that before we put that to the panel? Richard?
No, it's very self-explanatory. Thank you, Zoe.
Great, lovely. So let's start with Stephen this time. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the ways you can make that more personal is by incorporating videos. When you incorporate video, so one of the comments earlier about how do you express the emotions, because as they say, only 7% of communication is words. So how are you able to express the remaining 93% of communication that helps you create a wonderful experience? Well, the closest way you can do that, not being in person, is through the use of videos. So if you're able to incorporate videos into the session, and depending on the age group of the session and the type of audience within the session, there are generally as human beings, we're visual learners. Therefore, video does a great job of communicating that message, which then overall helps improve the experience within learning. So that would be my tip or my sort of comment around that. By incorporating videos, while you don't want everything to be video, then it's not, if you will, it's not real time and it's not a more personal experience, because then they're just watching videos. But in incorporating videos in person with that interactivity element, that will help boost that experience.
I'd say one thing that's really useful in a digital environment, which is harder to manage offline, is learners themselves being able to manage their own pace. When I was teaching, you'd have your kind of how do you do your class so that the slower ones get helped and the gifted and talented are pushed, and that's really hard to do when you've got this traditional someone's teaching and everyone's doing things in their books. So I think recognizing the fact that learners, some learners will be quite passive and some learners will be quite eager, you're in a much better position in a digital environment to cater for the eager ones. And as Stephen was saying, for the passive ones, you can create new ways to make it interesting and to make it engaging. In fact, I'm just going to share a little link. There's a thing called Mentimeter. I don't know if you've come across it. It's like a poll thing online. The other one is Miro, which is a way, I don't have the link to that, Miro. That's a kind of, it's like you create the equivalent of a facilitation board, post-it notes. And Miro boards can be things that learners can come back to. So if you think about it, when you're in a classroom or in your classroom environment, learners are expected to take their own notes. But actually, if you could have a board that says, well, here are the outcomes people were wanting from the session. Did we meet them? Here are things that people wanted to find about later. Here they are. You can create, you can make learning longitudinal rather than cross-sectional. You can have the equivalent of a lesson kind of be returned to in a much easier way in an online environment than you can in an offline environment. So really the limitations are about what you want your learners to experience. And it's very exciting. And I have to say, it's a quick one. I don't know if anyone knows, but my husband is Drew Linden, who is currently doing the policy officer and the project manager officer stuff. And we've been having lots of conversations about how to improve the JDA learning experience. So if he starts using Miro or Mentimeter or the Zoom whiteboard, it'll be probably because I've been prodding him to.
Funnily enough, one of my colleagues subscribed today for a transcription service to take video into written documentation automatically for a different purpose. It wasn't actually for a learning purpose. It was for some work we've been doing with supply chain. However, it would be a good way to provide people with notes in terms of that. Mind you, if you make it too easy for people to learn, how are we ever going to meet the 20% off the job training rule the government says that everybody has, because things don't take enough time? But no, that's brilliant. Video is really good, Steve. I think the best use of video we've come across recently is somebody who had gone, in this case, to the global head of the Association of Proposal Management Professionals, and for people's induction had recorded a little 20-second clip which essentially counts the apprenticeship as a first stage in a journey towards a career as a proposal management professional, as opposed to an apprenticeship. And that raised the whole bar of the program and set the right tone. And I'm sure you're right, Stephen, that there are lots of other ways to use video in the program, including slicing and dicing bits of these sorts of videos, of course, as well.
Absolutely. The stats shows that video gets 1,800% more engagement than pictures and text combined.
Right.
Absolutely, and I think that it would be really good, as you say, Stephen, for organisations to really look creatively about how they can see the potential around chopping stuff up and repurposing it, because I think what sometimes happens is that with every organisation actually is that the video can be seen as a final destination. And you're absolutely right, Stephen, with all of these digital assets at the moment, whatever they are, whether it's content, whether it's a blog, whether it's a video, whether it's something we have on TikTok, there are so many different ways in which they can be repurposed and used as part of the customer experience.
Absolutely. I'll give you one example of how you can create one piece of content and use it in multitude ways. So I did a video, and the main video was hosted on YouTube. And then what we did was we took a nice, say, 2-minute section of that video, re-edited it, the same video, just re-edited it into into portrait form, and hosted that on Instagram TV, IGTV, the same video. We stripped the entire audio of the original video that was hosted on YouTube, put that on all the different podcasting channels, from the same one video. Then we converted the video into the example that Richard mentioned, which is transcription and transcribing, and turned that into a blog post that was hosted on the website. And then ever so frequently, we would take 30-second chunks and 45-second chunks from the original huge video hosted on YouTube and put that on, say, Facebook when he applies. We'll throw it on LinkedIn when he applies. Twitter is literally, you can only have about 2 minutes worth of video on there, so we will use it on Twitter where he applies. And that's how you've created one piece of content and you've just repurposed it. And where the content has facts, we would actually turn those facts into what we call an infographic to then host on Pinterest. So you're literally covering every single platform that you can think of. And we've not even talked about email marketing that you can use the blog version to hit then. But by just having that one video, you've actually covered across the board. That's why I love video so much, because if you were to go the other way, it's not as easy. But if you start with video, you can funnel it down into every single platform that you can think of.
Brilliant. I'd also say that if you're having video, you make sure it's watchable without volume, because about 60% of Facebook users watch videos without sound on. So if your video can't be watched and understood without sound, then you're wasting the opportunity to engage people in that content.
Brilliant. Really good advice, thank you. So we've got just 5 minutes left, and we've had a very fruitful discussion. So huge thank you to Hannah and Stephen. I think they've covered so much ground in their answers, and we've all learned a great deal from that. So we're extremely grateful to them. Thank you, Hannah and Stephen, for joining us. Because we've covered so many different topics and so many different facets of the customer experience there, I think it would be great for us all to take a moment to consider what we're going to do differently after today, having learned from Hannah and Stephen's expertise. So what I'd like people to do now is to just put an idea into the chat about one thing that they're going to do differently, about how they're going to improve the customer experience for the people that their organisations serve. So if you could put your thoughts into the chat, that would be great. Excellent. Some great.
Peter, that comment is, I can tell you from data and practicality, you will get a much better conversion rate with video proposals than you will just inviting people, because I have run that as a campaign and I have done it and it works notoriously.
Really good, thank you. Lots of very good advice there. So Peter, brilliant to hear about that change you're making. Steve, love the point about Mentimeter. I used Mentimeter at a different webinar that I was running for someone else a few weeks ago, and it worked really well. There's something about seeing that data coming in real time that's really compelling. And Loza, I love your point about using video to enhance learning and understanding, and Hannah and Stephen have shared some fantastic examples on that, so hopefully that's given you lots of food for thought. So we're extremely grateful to our panel today. Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you, Stephen, for taking the time to share all of their vast experience in this area. So thank you so much for that. I feel that we all learned a lot from hearing from them and running through those questions with them. Very grateful to all of our delegates as well. I can see from the quality of the ideas that you're sharing about what you're going to do differently as a result. That's really shown how much you've engaged with today. So thank you so much for that. Next Monday, we've got the final webinar in our series, which makes me a tiny bit sad, but also very excited about the topic that we're going to cover, and I'm sure it's one that we can all relate to, because it's about the impact that COVID-19 has had on career progression. What are the challenges, but also what are the opportunities, and what can we all do to position ourselves for those? And if you've got any burning questions about that, please do feel free to email me ahead of the session. My email is zoe.amma@jga-group.co.uk, and we'll make sure that we pick those questions up as part of the discussion. Finally, the last thing that I wanted to share with you is please do follow JGA on LinkedIn. We will be sharing more insights there, including about the webinar series. And speaking of content, there will be more nuggets and insights shared there as well. So thank you so much to everyone for coming. A big thank you to Hannah, and a big thank you to Stephen for being our wonderful panel today. Thank you so much for joining us, and a very big thank you to all of you for taking part and participating in a very lively discussion today. I hope you've enjoyed it and you've learned as much as I have. And we look forward to seeing you next Monday, same time, to talk about career progression. So we'll see you then. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thank you, Zoe. Brilliant.
Good to meet you all. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much, Hannah.
Thank you.